Jorge Molina, Director of the Committee of Asian Affairs and Professor of International Relations at the University of Buenos Aires. Our final two speakers are Hideaki Shinoda, a Professor of Political Science and International Relations at Japan's Hiroshima University, and Cecilia Onasca, a researcher at the University of Buenos Aires Center of International Studies. Without further ado, let's go started with our first speaker, Mr. Jose Octavio Ordon.
It's a great pleasure. First of all, thank you, Ambassador Hiroshi Yamaguchi, not only to facilitate this important meeting with the special presentation of Professor Shinoda. Welcome, Professor Shinoda, to the bilateral. Good morning in Japan and good evening here in Buenos Aires, in Argentina. But not only for this, Ambassador, the reality is that you are very, very involved, working together in different activities between CARI and the Japan Embassy. It's a great pleasure for us, especially today, not only to speak about our excellent, very positive, with incredible future in our bilateral relation, but plus the technology, the economic organization of Japan, the culture of Japan, the history, and so on, that for us is very, very important. It's a great honor for us to share with you, all of you, these issues. But in this moment, to analyze from Japan, from the region, the global impact and the impact in the region, in Asia, in the Pacific region, and especially the point of view of Japan, it is very, very important for the new era we are living. And we believe, obviously, that we have a bipolar conflict relation between the United States and China, but it's not hegemonic. Different countries are playing a very important role in the present, but also to establish and to build better multilateral relation that is important for the peace, for development, to face the different challenge and risk that we have in the different in terms of pandemic, in terms of the environmental issue and so on. For this reason, thank you for this opportunity. It's a great honor for us. Ambassador, thank you for being here again.
Ambassador Hiroshi Yamaguchi, you can continue, please.
Yes, first of all, good evening to you all here in Argentina, and of course, good morning to our participants from Tokyo, and special thanks to Professor Shinoda for attending this meaningful dialogue. It's a great pleasure to host this seminar in collaboration with CARI, one of the best think tanks on international relationships in the region. And my special thanks to Dr. Shinoda again for his valuable opportunity to learn about his insights on the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Especially, he has recently published a book, unfortunately only in Japanese, titled Geopolitics of War, which contains valuable insights into the nature of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And I think he will share some of his insights in today's lecture. It is unfortunate that after 1 year since the beginning of the Russian invasion against Ukraine, we still have to repeat the same call for peace. As G7 chair this year, Japan will embody the G7 firm determination to stop Russian aggression and uphold the international order based on rule of law. Here in Argentina as well, Japan as the G7 chair has carried out activity to show our solidarity with Ukraine together with our G7 ambassadors. Working together with our strategic partner, Argentina, we have shown our commitment to achieve an inclusive, just, and lasting peace based on the principles of the UN Charter, including the sovereignty and territorial integrity. I would also mention that the Prime Minister Kishida had just visited Kiev on March 21st and had the summit with President Zelensky. In the meeting, Prime Minister Kishida expressed his respect for the courage of the Ukrainian people standing up to defend their homeland against aggression, and convey Japan's unwavering support for Ukraine. Prime Minister has also invited Ukraine to the G7 summit in Hiroshima. We must keep in mind that the full-scale invasion of Ukraine takes place in a changing global context, rising importance of the global south and Japan's new plan for the free and open Indo-Pacific, which promotes Indo-Pacific cooperation, a reflection of some of the changes and foreshadows further changes to come. In this context, Argentina, as a G20 member and an important member of the Global South who share our values such as democracy and human rights, should not remain on the sidelines. We hope that today's seminar by Dr. Shinoda will provide a perspective on this complex global situation and hopefully give an input to the ongoing discussion on how Argentina should engage with the Asia-Pacific region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now we can continue with Mr. Jorge Molina, the Director of the Committee of Asian Studies.
Thanks so much. Again, good evening to all our colleagues in Buenos Aires, and good morning to Professor Shinoda in Tokyo. As Director of the Asian Affairs Committee, I very much appreciate the Japanese Embassy support to make this activity feasible, because we know the busy schedule that Professor Hideaki Shinoda has, and we know also that the time difference sometimes is not workable. As it was stated, I will introduce Professor Hideaki Shinoda to all of you. Let me start by saying that he has a huge resume. It's more than 20 pages long, so we can have an idea of the length and the fruitful career that as a scholar he has had. Let me start by saying that he has a PhD in international relations from the London School of Economics and Political Science, which belongs to the University of London. He also holds a master's degree in political science from Waseda University, and his BA is also from Waseda University in Japan. As regards his current working experience, he is professor at the Graduate School of Global Studies, Tokyo University of Foreign Studies, and he is director and main lecturer from the Hiroshima Peace Builder Center for the program from Human Resource Development for Peace Building. As to the awards that he has received during his career, he holds the Yomiuri Yoshino Sakusu Award, the Suntory Prize for Social Sciences and Humanities, the Osaraji Jiro Rondan Award, and also let me say something about the academic memberships he has. He is a member of the International Studies Association, from the International Peace Research Association, from the Japan International Relations Association, the Japan International Law Association, the Japan International Security Association, among others. With regards the last books he wrote in the last 8 years, we can say that he wrote What is Conflict Resolution in the year 2021, then How to Interpret Japan's Constitution in the year 2019. Then we can also say that he wrote about history of discourses on the right of collective self-defense in the year 2016, among others. So we can have an idea of the career in terms not only of quantity, but also of quality of Dr. Hideaki Shinoda. Therefore, let me again thank him so much for his presence today with us, and of course, the Japanese Embassy for making this activity happen. Please, Dr. Hideaki Shinoda, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Molina, for your very much kindest introduction. And thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, Mr. Ordon, and Ambassador Yamauchi for very wonderful introductions to this special occasion. This is, ladies and gentlemen, this is a great honor for me, to speak in front of you. Can you, by the way, hear me very well?
It's okay.
Is the screen okay?
Yes.
All right. Okay. I would like to speak for 45 to 50 minutes, up to 9 o'clock in Japan time. Let me speak 40 to 50 minutes, and then we will have questions and answers for the remaining 25 or 30 minutes or so. On this occasion, I put the title in this way. Let me try to share the PowerPoint slide. Basically, I would like to try to stimulate your thoughts by presenting something a bit big perspective. And in order for me to do that, I set up this title. We are all concerned about the impact of the Russian invasion in Ukraine at this moment. And then from taking this opportunity, I would like to discuss what kind of impact Japan is trying to identify in this circumstance in terms of its foreign policy. That is a main topic. In doing so, I would like to show some of the theoretical perspectives by highlighting what we may call the two opposing theories of geopolitics. And this is the topic which I discussed in the latest book, unfortunately in Japanese language, though it was published a week ago under the title of Geopolitics Concerning War. So it's a fresh topic for me. And these days being requested by many Japanese publishers. So I tend to respond to these requests by publishing Japanese books to appeals to the general public. This is one of such publications. This is now really purely academic work, but deals with some general perspectives concerning foreign policies and so on. However, my special academic specialty resides in the context of international peace operations. The latest publication in this direction is under the title of Partnership International Peace Operations, which I'm planning to publish in English language, though I'm not sure I can do that this year. But this phenomenon is to indicate the latest trend of international peace operations responding to armed conflict in the world. We used to understand that the United Nations is the main provider of United Nations peacekeeping operations. But these days, half of the international peace operations are provided by regional organizations. And more strikingly, the combination of various organizations like ad hoc manners of collaborations, partnerships between UN and other entities, or among regional, sub-regional entities have become very common, rather in terms of a very big structure of international peace operations. Timely collaboration as well as functional division of labor among various organizations is already an established standard. So I discussed this phenomenon from the perspective of overall international relations. I spent 1 minute or 2 minutes describing my latest research topic. Because of my introduction, or to my own profile, but also the very general context of today's work, today's presentation. The world is quite complex these days, but the various efforts of partnerships have been made. And Japan is in such a trend in its own way. When it comes to the United Nations, Japan is a key state in the community of United Nations. But when it comes to regional organizations, Japan is one of the rare countries which does not belong to regional organizations which provides actual functional operations, like peace operations. In Africa, there are many entities like AU, ECOWAS, IGAD, SADC, and so on. In various ways, they've been engaged with operations. In Europe, of course, whether they are really advanced or functional or highly respected, EU, NATO, OSCE, these, in addition to more specific regional organizations exist. And Middle East, so many regional organizations. Even in South Africa, South Asia, SARC exists. And then, of course, in Southeast Asia, ASEAN has its distinctive, significant presence. And Organization of American States in the Western Hemisphere has a very long history of its own. So Japan has constraints in the sense that it doesn't belong to these such operational regional organizations. It is not the fault of Japanese foreign policy. It is because of the history and the dire security situation in Northeast Asia, especially the impact of Korean Peninsula, as well as the Taiwan Strait. But whatever the reasons are, that is a constraint and a condition. So in one manner, we can identify, cultivate the possibility of our foreign policy. That is the hidden context of today's work. Let me speak a little bit about my background, another profile. I'm a director of the Hiroshima Peace Builder Center. This is completely another hut, though I would like to mention it because I'm working for it, for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on this capacity. Through this organization, we provide several training courses annually, so that we can develop human resources, meaning young professionals who are ready to work for United Nations or any other organizations in order to contribute to overall peace-building activities. According to our statistics, more than half of the graduates of the primary course, the main course, designed for younger professionals are now working for within the UN system. And so we've been running this program for more than 15 years. This is the end point of the 16th year of this program. So I may sometimes mention this kind of a background in today's presentation. I'm sorry for long introduction, but now I would like to get back to my own main topic, the impact of Russian invasion in Ukraine from the perspective of geopolitical theories. And now I would like to contextualize today's point in a bit dramatic manner. I hope you can see the PowerPoint slide screen now. Prime Minister Kishida visited Kyiv on the 21st of March, very recently, 2-3 days ago. By the way, I was in Palestine, and then I came back to Japan 12 hours ago. So that is a part of my job. So I'm not constant. I did not check out the details while I was in Palestine, but however, it was big news in many ways. And in the sense that Prime Minister Kishida has been trying to find the timing to visit Kyiv for many months, at least sometime in sometime in the last year, though he has not been able to do that due to some constraints. And eventually he did it 2 months before the G7 summit meeting in Hiroshima, which is the home province city of Prime Minister Kishida himself. So in this way, this is quite a significant news event in Japan, and then it's going to have some kind of impact on the G7 community and so on, or even global community. I checked out the news in Palestine, and they through some media, Asia media, as well as SNS and so on, and people tended to report this news in this way. While Mr. Xi Jinping was visiting Moscow to meet President Putin, while Prime Minister Kishida was visiting Kiev in Ukraine to meet President Zelensky. This took place simultaneously in a dramatic manner, and then it indicates many of the aspects of the world. Number one, this indicates how Japan would like to identify itself in the current international community, and how we would like to express the direction of our foreign policy in a dramatic manner in public relations. Let me quote the joint statement on special global partnership between Ukraine and Japan issued at the time of Prime Minister's visit to Ukraine. The statement emphasized solidarity in countering Russia's aggression against Ukraine. That is the overall theme of the joint statement. And in this context, the joint statement expressed the understanding, which is also the expression of Japan's standpoint in its foreign policy. Japan and Ukraine recognize Russia's aggression against Ukraine is the violent incident that undermines the very foundation of the international order based on the rule of law, constitutes a grave violation of the basic principles enshrined in a UN Charter, in particular the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity as one. So Japan is not just simply opposed to the aggression. It clearly recognizes the aggression as the violation of the overall international order, threats to the very fundamental principles of international society. It is against the rule, almost like a constitutional rule of the international community. That is the view expressed quite often by many sources in the government of Japan, but it was clearly indicated at the beginning of the joint statement, taking the opportunity of the Prime Minister's visits to Ukraine. And a little bit more specifically, the very first paragraph of the joint statement expresses the view that the aggression presents a direct threat to security, peace, and stability, not only in the Euro-Atlantic area, but also in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond. What does it mean? Recognize that both two countries, including Japan, recognize the inseparability of Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific security. In the context of the importance of maintaining the free and open international order based on the rule of law expressed by the purposes and the principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations, Article 1 and Article 2 of UN Charter. That means that Japan exists in Asia, and then we use the concept of Indo-Pacific in order to express this fact that Japan exists in Asia these days. And this region of Indo-Pacific, which we are talking about in the foreign policy so often, is clearly linked to Euro-Atlantic. Perhaps so in terms of the connection of the seas, but not just physically, but also politically or geopolitically. It is reported that Japan has in mind the Taiwan Strait when we discuss Ukraine. And then it is expressed in a bit more specific languages even in this joint statement. So there's no secret that there is a comparison or reference to implicit reference to the Taiwan Strait or some other points in East Asia, Northeast Asia, or Indo-Pacific region when Japan discusses Ukraine as a Euro-Atlantic context. And then all these are the challenges against the overall principles of the international community. That may sound very grand, but anyway, that is this view expressed clearly or emphasized by Japan at this moment. And then I just want to make a mention, reference to Ms. Sylvia Alessandra Fernandez de Gurumandi. She was president of the ICC, International Criminal Court, to which Japan contributes most significantly as the largest financial contributor to the ICC among the members, 123 members of the ICC. So Japan has quite a lot of commitments, stakes over the ICC, and she is at this moment the president of the Assembly of the State Parties. It's like a general assembly of the ICC. And so when we speak of rule of law, the ICC and some other context are relevant. And then I'm sorry that I may not specifically mention Argentine in my presentation, but the country, Argentina, is already always there. So in a very much contextualized, relevant manners. But anyway, Japanese foreign policies have this kind of position at this moment as regards the Russian invasion in Ukraine. Is this dramatically new, revolutionary, and so on? It entails somewhat new elements, of course, in the eyes of scholars like myself. Perhaps Ambassador Yamauchi and his colleagues may correct me if I may make wrong statements or problematic understanding. But I hope I'm not wrong that, of course, the Russian invasion in Ukraine is a new incident, although our standpoint is in line with the overall traditional foreign policy. Japanese foreign policies can be explained by, let's say, most traditionally so-called three basic principles of Japanese foreign policies expressed in 1957. Well, foreign policies were dramatically revised after the Second World War. So all the traditions were made after World War II, that's for sure. So this is almost like the oldest doctrine of Japanese foreign policies. There are pros and cons about this position of the three basic principles. And of course, the implications, context, and the manner we interpret them might have differed since the time of expression, original issuance of these three basic principles in Japanese foreign policy in 1957. But it doesn't mean that we have abandoned or we have really drastically changed these three principles. So very basic understanding that we are maintaining these three basic principles. However, of course, the connotations are constantly changing. Nuances may be changing. So this is the topic which I started with, and then I will perhaps come back to this point at the end of my presentation. The famous three basic principles express these 3 points: United Nations centered, United Nations centrism. This is a translation of a Japanese wording. So as an English language, it's a little bit ambiguous. I'm so sorry. Usually, the government of Japan explain these in domestic societies. It is not so much often discussed in foreign overseas discussions. But the centrism of its commitments to the United Nations, shortly after the San Francisco Peace Treaty, in which Japan restored its sovereignty. And Japan joined in the United Nations around this time. So this is the one of the obvious points Japan wanted to highlight. And the second principle says that cooperation with the free states. That means that the alliance mechanism, this is not a secret at all, alliance mechanism with the United States and a de facto partnership with its allies in the free world. And this tends to be interpreted, of course, at the beginning in the context of the Cold War. So Japan wants to take a universalistic standpoint, but in the reality of the Cold War, it belongs to the alliance mechanism of the free world, centered in the United States, and the Japan-US security alliance is a crucial mechanism of Japanese foreign policy. Thirdly, however, or the more because of these points, Japan never forgets that it exists in Asia. That tends to be interpreted traditionally that Japan would like to take care of its subtle relations with neighboring countries or many countries in Asia, which Japan invaded, occupied during World War II. Obviously, in 1950s, there are many complex sentiments, politically sensitive sentiments existed in Asia. And then, of course, they still exist nowadays, although the context are really different. But we don't say that they have already gone at all. So with whatever the contexts are, we never forget that we belong to Asia. All these combined, we understand the standpoint of Japan. And as I said, contexts are completely different now. Backgrounds and the implications are different, but still, we would like to reinterpret Japan's foreign policy in line with these three principles. Therefore, after I examine some of the background information, I would like to get back to this point at the end of my presentation. I'm sorry for being grounded today from this standard PowerPoint slide, though I hope the scholar's contribution may entail the job to provide big stories. Where are we now in terms of the historical development of events in international relations? We quite often, or media, not just the scholars, or rather media journalists, perhaps sensationally talk about the end of the Cold War kind of issues. We used to talk about the end of what is the impact of the end of the Cold War. Perhaps in the 1990s, we discussed it so much when I was in London as a doctoral student. People in Europe so enthusiastically discussed the validity of the expansion of NATO in Europe. There were pros and cons. And in the initial moment, several to the point of my graduation from LSE, which was 1997 or so, people were not so much convinced of the validity of the expansion. And then the first term of the Clinton administration in the States was not so much clear. Though a second term of the Clinton administration took the path of expansion. And then in 1999, as you know, the expansion began to include 30 members of NATO. So almost like double the size of the original NATO at the time of the end of the Cold War. If the period of the end of the Cold War was the time to discuss the issues like the validity of NATO, and decided to do so, and so on. Now we feel that we are in the moments to reflect on the consequences of this kind of decision, of these decisions. Still, there are pros and cons. We are not 100% sure of the validity. And even if we are committed to one position, the way we express it is not very much simple, like it was good or bad. From this perspective, it could have achieved this, but from another perspective, blah, blah, blah. But put it simply, NATO is defending their member states, although NATO is not defending its non-member, like Ukraine, and then a dramatic event happens. What was the deal to make a threshold in this way? Very much complicated issues. But anyway, when we discussed the NATO expansion, there was the issue of security power vacuum in the very much critical region called East Europe. Many wars happened due to the deal, the manner states dealt with East European countries. When they failed to deal with East European countries, they might fall into many countries in Europe or some other countries, including the United States, might fall into the trap of major war, major confrontation. From that perspective, they decided to fill in the power vacuum in East Europe to some extent, and then not perfectly. But when they decided, there was academic talk about the victory of liberal democracy. If we East European people wants to be liberal democracies, who can stop it? Who ought to stop it? If they become liberal democracies, as if they are very good members of NATO, what will be the obstacles to decline new members from East Europe? This kind of ideological aspect, as well as historical understanding of, put it very simply, really simply, but what people may have called the victory of liberal democracy in terms of the so-called end of history, promulgated by Francis Fukuyama. These issues existed, and now we are not in a euphoria to celebrate this kind of narrative, although we are not sure whether we should how we should reflect on it. After that, the war on terror began, and the NATO countries were involved heavily, really heavily. When the President Biden remarked that the United States was never committed to nation building in Afghanistan after he withdrew his troops from Afghanistan in 2021, Europeans were so shocked. They had believed that they had been committed to nation building in Afghanistan for two decades by initially saying that they are all Americans after September the 11th. What was it, the war on terror, in the context of the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, in terms of nation building in these countries, together with some other countries? At this moment, we are not 100% sure what they were. President Putin might have his own particular view about these incidents. We know how he thinks about these issues, like the aftermath of the victory of narrative of the victory of liberal democracy, and the narrative after the withdrawal of NATO US troops from Afghanistan. And then I don't know how much impact he might have seen, but considering these issues together with some other issues, he decided to invade Ukraine. And now we are discussing some other topics, but this sense that we live in the period after the period of euphoria, the significant period of high tensions of ideological commitments, that this is shared by all of us. Looking at the current situation, of course, it's too early and too complex to conclude anything, but we can see the over a rough phenomenon. We are full of armed conflict. Ukraine is a major conflict, even compared to some other conflicts, but it is not exceptional in the sense of occurrences of armed conflicts. People say that it is very exceptional because the war is between two sovereign states, while most of other armed conflicts in the world are internal conflicts. Yes and no. As a researcher on armed conflict, I have a mixed view. Of course, each war has its unique nature. So in the sense that it's true that the Russo-Ukraine war has its own unique nature, we never underestimate it. But it is really, really exceptional, and then it doesn't make sense to compare it with other armed conflicts. I really doubt. Because of the nature of the armed conflicts. But anyway, looking at some other data, we also live in major humanitarian disasters. So many humanitarian crises. We are spending so much amount of money for humanitarian operations, and then it seems that our efforts are not significantly sufficient, and the Ukrainian crisis even worsen our financial contributions. And then over Europe, over Africans, so many Africans are complaining that funds are absorbed by the Ukrainian crisis to some extent, and then so on. So we are so much emphasizing the importance of the Grain Initiative. But the overall context is that so many humanitarian disasters. Bit more political size, we are discussing the decline of democracy. We scholars debated first wave of democratization, third wave of democratization, fourth wave Arab Spring, and so on. And then after the end of the Cold War, the assumption was that the democratization worldwide was taking place in terms of the increase in the number of democracies. But now we feel that this phenomenon has stopped. And we don't know permanently it stops, or this is a temporary termination. We don't know, but a significant decline in the number of democracies. The termination of the widespread democratization movement might have been observed very recently. So scholars argue, it depends on the way we make statistics. There are so many ambiguous countries where we don't know whether a specific country is real democracy or real autocracy, but according to some statistics, the number of autocracies has surpassed the number of democracies very recently. And this is the number of coup d'etat. It's not very clear in these statistics, but the only 3 years in our decade, in the 2020s, still already the number of coup d'etat is or the same as the number of coup d'etat in the last decade. So the number is going to surpass the numbers in the last decades. That means that we might be witnessing so many occurrences of a coup d'etat, a fragility of governance. In this context, the United States is talking about the worldview of democracies against autocracies. This is a grand narrative. It's so easy to criticize this simplistic worldview, though it has its context. We are now, I feel that we are not able to deny the relevant elements in the existing world in which United States president might want to talk about this kind of issue, whether this could develop as Biden doctrine or whatever. And this is the worldview some of the major countries may be shared. Japan does not necessarily express the worldview of democracies versus autocracies so clearly, although we are very happy to be included in democracies. And then as an ally of the United States, we don't necessarily oppose or rather promote the spread of democracies. We are the chair of G7, therefore Prime Minister Kishida is so committed to talking about G7 summit meeting in Hiroshima, his constituency, in May. This is emerging as a very great, important forum over the Russian invasion in Ukraine, because all these G7 countries are united in advancing international efforts to introduce sanctions against Russia to support Ukraine. All the more because of the emerging significance or revitalized significance of G7. Some other forums like BRICS might have been emphasized in the context of ICC. It's been emphasized too. South Africa is in quite a complicated position as ICC member to whether or not it can host President Putin for the summit meeting, which is supposed to take place sometime in the summer of this year. BRICS consists of 5 countries at this moment. As you may see, no member country of BRICS represents, no multiple countries represent the same region. Rough understanding is that the emerging power in different countries belong to BRICS. This is a very rough interpretation, but it is true. So when Argentina and Iran apply for the membership of BRICS, the debates begin. China is says to be very much happy about applications, while some other members are not very much happy. It could make some kind of a restructuring of the purpose and nature of BRICS if these countries really join. We don't know whether they can really join. And then related, almost like the same structure of opposing views, FOIP and BRICS, BRI. Through the channel of FOIP, we are talking about, Japan is talking about rule-based international order. It is not intended to confront any other international initiative. That is official position of Japan, and then FOIP is not necessarily supposed to be so. It's true, but we all believe that well, there's a context in the world. It is not, even if it is not official position of Japan, because of backgrounds and the context, this could describe the one of the different worldviews. What kind of different worldviews? Then all these, in order to explain all these ongoing phenomena, geopolitical theories might be useful, instrumental, because it indicates systematic manners of explaining two opposing camps, theories that exist in the current world. I'm not the first one, though I'm almost the first one to refer to these theoretical traditions in this overall context of the 21st century. And so I'm not sure whether these names are really appropriate, but in the discussions about so-called geopolitical theories, there are 2 traditions, Anglo-American tradition and the Continental Tradition. And they represent 2 different worldviews. Sometimes people underestimate the difference between them, but the difference really represents completely different worldviews, really opposing worldviews, and they are highly relevant to the 21st century world. Anglo-American tradition emphasizes the existence of sea power and land power. And Russia, as a so-called heartland state, has very significant nature of the champion of land power because it's landlocked. Almost in terms of major rivers, it doesn't have a permanent access to the ocean. In terms of traditional access to the oceans. And it has advantage of northern part because of small presence of antagonistic entities in the Antarctic region. And sea powers are island powers because they do not belong to the continent. They have their own particular natures. They are divided, but all the more because they are divided, they have a tendency to constitute a network of sea powers to confront and contain the expansionism of land power, especially the heartland country like Russia. Continental tradition has a completely different nature. It emphasizes Raum in the German language, where English language may use the word zone. In terms of sphere, the concept of sphere of influence, sphere might be more relevant, but because of the nature, Raum, Lebensraum kind of a realm may represent the tradition of the continental tradition, continental school of thought. Halford Mackinder, who used to be the president of the dean of the LSE more than 100 years ago, he represents this kind of Anglo-American worldview of geopolitical theory. It divides into a heartland. It divides the world into heartland, inner crescent, outskirt area of the Eurasian continent, and island areas, which is called the outer crescent. American geopolitical theorist called Nicholas Spikema reinforced the worldview of Halford Mackinder by inventing some of the new concepts like Dreamland in order to emphasize the importance of the inner crescent. Karl Haushofer, the Nazi period of a German theorist scholar, who was the catalyst of a German-Japanese alliance mechanism, he was very much interested in Japan, and he put an emphasis on the role of Japan in East Asia. And in order to confront moral doctrine sphere and the communist sphere of the Soviet Union, Karl Haushofer advocated the German-Japanese alliance mechanism in the 1930s. According to his worldview, the world tends to consist of multiple spheres, multipolar world in the 21st century kind of language, and each sphere may have its own hegemon. But they are not the worldwide hegemons. They are not supposed to be worldwide hegemons as long as they maintain their own spheres of influence. If each hegemon in each sphere of influence respects other hegemons, the spheres of influence, world might tend to be stabilized. But if they don't respect the spheres of influence of others, the world might get jeopardized, destabilized. The point is that there are no roles of small states, no UN Charter principles. Sovereign equality doesn't exist. This is one worldview, which was eventually not represented in the UN Charter after the Second World War. The Lebensraum of Adolf Hitler was the consequence influenced by Karl Haushofer. Haushofer preached this doctrine to Adolf Hitler directly, in person. And Hitler loved his doctrine, and then that doctrine was defeated at the time of World War II. Alexander Dugin is very famous in contemporary Russia in terms of his advocates of Eurasianism. And Eurasianism worldview may have its own distinctive nature, but it is very similar to Karl Haushofer's worldview. It belongs to very much traditional nature of the what we may call the continental tradition of geopolitical theories. They are talking about a multipolar world, but in which Russia is the hegemon of its own sphere of influence. And of course, clearly, it regards Ukraine as part of this sphere of influence. And a bit more historical context in academic manner. Heather Ball was the top scholar in the tradition of the English School of International Relations, which influenced myself so much. It has the historical understanding of the transformation from European international society up to 19th century to the new world of a world or universal international society, which began at the beginning of the 20th century. This transformation could be signified by one personality like Woodrow Wilson of the United States. When the United States joined in World War I to influence the aftermath, post-war settlement after World War I, the world changed its nature in terms of its principles. Europeans used to talk about balance of power as if it is a constitutional principle. Any kind of incident that could violate the balance of power mechanism was bad in European international society up to 19th century. Eventually, it collapsed without any intentional violations at the time of World War I. So therefore, Woodrow Wilson advocated abolition of this world view. Why don't you introduce collective security instead of balance of power? As a result, the privileges of great powers will go, and then instead we will introduce the principle of self-determination. Put it simply, Woodrow Wilson inserted these ideas in the Covenant of the League of Nations, which he drafted initially, although United States Congress did not approve it because of the fear of European imperial powers' betrayal in the future, though the ideas came from the states. Article 21 of the Covenant of the League of Nations states that nothing in this Covenant of the League of Nations violates the idea of the Monroe Doctrine. In the eyes of Germans and the Japanese at the time of the Imperial Japan, this is outright apparent hypocrisy. While Woodrow Wilson was talking about universal collective security, United States tried to seek or secure its own sphere of influence in the name of the Monroe Doctrine. So therefore, Imperial Japan began to talk about the Great East Asia Prosperity Sphere, its own sphere of influence. And the Germans began to talk about the 11th realm as their own sphere of influence. So they all were inclined toward the traditional theory of continental theory of geopolitics. After they felt they were betrayed by Americans. But Woodrow Wilson did not have such a view. Well, Monroe Doctrine, according to Woodrow Wilson, was the doctrine to advocate universal principles with their partners, like-minded states in the Western Hemisphere. Monroe Doctrine functions to defend international principles. It could expand to Europe through World War II. It could expand in the form of NATO expansion. So Monroe Doctrine is not a geopolitically constrained idea. It is a universalistic doctrine. It began in the Western Hemisphere at the beginning, but it could easily expand. That was the Anglo-American network style oriented worldview. And now it was embodied in the UN Charter. We talk about international peace and security, self-determination, human rights, and then there are more specific provisions to defend these principles. And these are the principles referred to by Prime Minister Kishida as one. Big picture again, though, I would like to reconfirm the same thing. We are witnessing the rise of the number of armed conflicts, but it is in line with the increase in the number of states in the first place. the number of states was so small. At the beginning of the 20th century, people counted the number like a dozen, or 12, or even lower than 10 before World War I, because there were a limited number of sovereign states before World War I. But because of self-determination, non-use of force, and all these principles, the number continued to increase. And this phenomena might have been temporarily terminated or permanently suspended or whatever, but we have been witnessing the constant increase in the number of states. As a result, the number of armed conflicts in terms of internal conflicts have increased. Well, in the first place, because of the increase in the number of fragile states, or number of states themselves itself. And worldwide phenomena is that the red zone in this statistics, internationalized interest rate. This is a significant part of the phenomenon of the armed conflicts in the 21st century. There are internal conflicts, but also internationalized internal conflicts. This is the constantly observed phenomenon of armed conflicts in our contemporary world. It is contradictory. Most of the or major part of conflicts are internal as well as international, but it is true. And then the Russo-Ukraine war is one dramatic representative of this worldwide phenomenon. It began with some kind of Eastern part-oriented conflict, at least in 2014, visibly. Russians are there all from the beginning, but the people believed it was internal conflict. And an outright invasion began in 2022. So pure war between sovereign states, but now they are concentrating on eastern part of Ukraine. So we don't know whether the invasion was a continuation of the war from 2014 or really a new adventure. As I said, this is a very much significant question, whether this is an internal war or international war, internationalized internal war. But all these represents the 21st century phenomenon of armed conflicts. Behind the scenes, the two doctrines opposing theories exist, and then containment policies and so on. I skipped the China's role. So let me conclude now, spending 1 more minute. As I declared at some point, I would like to get back to the 3 basic principles of Japanese foreign policies. We stick to UN charters. So UN-oriented position is maintained in Japanese foreign policies, but it does not clearly mean that the United Nations must handle all the deals. If United Nations as an organization appears, we get disappointed. No, well, UN is there over grain initiative and so on. But what is important is not the UN as an organization, but the principles enshrined in UN Charter. UN Charter oriented is the significant meaning of UN Center of Foreign Policy. As I explained, however, UN Charter might have its own distinctive history. It is associated with the Japanese history as well as international history. So in this context in mind, we really emphasize cooperation with the free states, having in mind our historical commitments very clearly. All the more because of our historical background, we never betray our partners in this context. But we never forget about the fact that we live in Asia. And not just a reflection about the invasion by Imperial Japan in Asia, but the more contextualized version of our identity in Asia in terms of inseparability of Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific. So all these words expressed in the joint statement by Prime Minister Kishida and President Zelensky, they are all in line with the basic principles of Japanese foreign policies already expressed in 1950s, but of course with a new context, new implications, new nuances. I'm sorry for exceeding 15 minutes, but I would like to stop here now. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hideaki Shinoda. Right now, we will follow some questions that we received here in the chat, as well as we encourage you, all the participants, to ask questions here. You can raise your hand, and I will give you the possibility to ask. We have a question from Dr. Jorge Molina. He asks if do you foresee the building and NATO based on the Quad and AUKUS in order to contain China and North Korea?
Did you get the question, Dr. Shinoda?
I'm sorry that I didn't feel that I got it. Can you repeat it again?
Yeah,
I will say it, no problem.
You can ask, yeah.
I send it by writing, but I can say it to you directly. According to your analysis, do you foresee the building of an Asian NATO based on the quadrilateral dialogue and the AUKUS?
Yeah, I thank you very much for the question. The last part was not clear enough. Japan belongs to in terms of geopolitical theory, belongs to the camp that advocates what I call the Anglo-American side of the geopolitical theory, which is in line with UN Charter. But from the perspective of other countries, too much association between the Anglo-American tradition and UN Charter, so they might have a little bit different interpretations of UN Charter, and then suspicion about the connection between the theory and the UN Charter. We are in a position to advocate the association and in defending UN Charter belonging to clearly the free world camp too. We really hope that there is no significant contradiction, but it is not very much clearly exhibited in the eyes of some other countries. So we would like to make efforts to make it clear that there is no contradiction. And so in this context, Pan-Asian regional organization may be advanced in the context of what Prime Minister Kishida, the connection in the context of Indo-Pacific strategy in line with the Euro-Atlantic security strategy. More loose networking system, yes, if there are functional mechanisms to reinforce this network of like-minded states, it is highly welcomed by Japan. But regionalism in Asia, against some other regional initiatives, or even in separately, that exists separately, if not in the form of inseparability. If regionalism exists separately from other initiatives, Japan wouldn't welcome it, perhaps. So more universalistic network we are going to welcome. And in this context, if we can promote like-minded states in Asia, we highly welcome it. We are in a position to promote it, but it cannot be a clear-cut regionalism as if we are advocating a sphere of influence or advocate of, if not Japan, but others, and then regionalism. We do not advocate regionalism as such.
Thank you, Professor Shinoda. Here we have one question. Matthias Jan asks, what do you think makes the security of Eurasia and the Indo-Pacific inseparable?
Okay, I would like to explain this one in a very concise manner because of limited time. This linkage of Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific states could be interpreted as the community of states which respects rule-based international order. So if I emphasize that point, it's not just UN principle oriented, it's more like a value oriented states. If there are elements like even for some states, like some states which do not respect the UN Charter fully, we don't necessarily get along with these non-UN Charter friendly countries on an equal footing with other like-minded states. We have friends, and then we may not regard all the states in the world as equal partners, equal friends. It's a value-oriented network in the form of respect to UN Charter or some other related doctrine like a rule-based international order might have de facto members and then suspicious elements in the world. That's true. No formal organization of rule-based international order, but instead, it should be the kind of community of values must be open to any countries. However, we don't suppose that all the countries are perfectly equal in terms of their commitments to this value-oriented community or rule-based international order, or which is the community of values. So again, I'm going back to the same point that I expressed in the first question. Even though we don't forget about the fact that we live in Asia, the regionalism is not the answer to advance our foreign policy commitments. More value-oriented community must be pursued always, crossing regional borders. And so from that perspective, if we find many partners in Euro-Atlantic area, we might put an emphasis on the fact that we have many partners in the Euro-Atlantic area. And if they are physically, the Indo-Pacific and Euro-Atlantic physically inseparable, of course, perhaps because of the sea, and then we are all typical sea powers, but the linkage is dramatically signified by the fact that we have like-minded partners in those regions too, in addition to Western Hemisphere, like Argentina too. But it seems that in the context of the Russo-Ukraine war, Japan has been emphasizing the fact that it believes that Japan has many like-minded partners in Euro-Atlantic world, ranging from Ukraine itself. And then security deals might have to be made in this from this perspective too. So that means that Japan is approaching NATO as a very much hardcore security mechanism too, because of this wild understanding of international relations and the overall direction of foreign policies. So even concrete security arrangements may be explained by this kind of overall worldview, a grand narrative of the community of values too. I hope I responded to this question.
Well, thank you, Professor Shinoda. Now we are going to continue with the final remarks, considering that we have limited time. Cecilia Onaja, she is the coordinator for the group of work in the Japan committee of in the Committee of Asian Affairs at the Council of Foreign Relations, and we would like to listen to her to say the final remarks of this event.
Yes, thank you very much. It's very short, my statement. As a coordinator of Japan's Issues Work Group, and in behalf of the Argentine Council for International Relations authorities and members, and all the audience, I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Shinoda for today's dissertation. Undoubtedly, it is vital to us to be conscious of the danger of the world peace that represent conflict as this. It is crucial in this very moment to hear and collect with accuracy all information about all parts involved in And Professor Shinoda brought us key information to know very clear what is in debate today, the theoretical basis of the position of Japan's government. This year, we are celebrating in Argentina 125 years of peaceful diplomatic relations between the two countries, and it is a great honor to us doing it also with this remarkable lecture. I would like to express our gratitude to the organizers of this conference, the Embassy of Japan in Argentina, Ambassador Yamauchi, and all staff members, the group of young members of the Council, the Japan's Issues Work Group colleagues who made this event possible. Finally, I wish to thank to the audience who shared this meeting in behalf of Dr. Ordon also. And with this word, I would like ending today's session. Thank you very much again, Dr. Shinoda. And it was a very impressive presentation. Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you very much for your kindest words. Thank you very much to all the audience. Thank you very much.
I would like to say one last thing. We have here in the chat a questionnaire that from the Embassy of Japan that you can answer, and we would be very pleasured if you can answer it. It's a brief questionnaire. Thank you all for participating tonight, and we look forward for further communication and relations.
Good night in Argentina, and have a very good day in Japan.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.